Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. So I did a couple of voiceovers. One was about time and life force as a currency, and another was sort of a follow up to that. And it's going to be part of my Journey series 157. But I wanted to take those two voiceovers out and make a separate video and store them away somewhere. I want to get a playlist going for a bunch of these types of videos. The first one, sometimes when I'm speaking, I can hear Chargy's voice. When you listen to somebody a lot, I wonder if people have this from my videos. But like if you receive a letter from them or something, when you read it, you can hear their voice like you see in a movie. Whereas, somebody's reading a letter they got from somebody, and then they have the actor playing that character read it. You can just hear the way the person would speak it. Like there's talks that Chargy gave that became written books. There was about, I would say, 40 books or more that were just Chargy's talks. And when after years of reading all of his stuff and hearing him talk, and I listened to so many of his talks, the preceptor tapes. When I would read one of these things, I could hear him saying it, like I could hear it in his voice. You internalize people, your parents to a certain extent, and whatever. Like because of their impression in you, and like part of them is inside of you. And in terms of what I do here, my brother influenced me. He was an AM radio person, so some of his, personality and the way he would express things, and then, of course, Chargy was somebody I listened to so much, and then I guess there's probably some other people, but sometimes when I talk, I can, it's almost like, it's a talk that Chargy would give, like it's just the way it comes through me, and I felt like the one with the first audio about time being a currency was very Chargy-esque. Just like how he would think about things, and so I don't know if it's he's coming through me, some way, or just the memory of him, what I've internalized from him, but there was some work done that, when he died, I received something from him. This YouTube channel popped right after Chargy died. Like it was like a channel that got maybe 100 views per video. I mean, there was maybe 1,000 or a couple thousand subscribers. I don't know. It was not I'd make a video once every month. There wasn't a big audience. And then I had a few videos that popped while, right when he died. Like, I mean, that week. He died, and this YouTube channel, my original YouTube channel, took off, Pockets of Future. And so, and it's all been, kind of a whirlwind since then. And so it was after his death that the channel was, like activated. And really me, because, I changed and got better at what I do here, my ability to speak publicly, or, whatever this is. This isn't public speaking, but express myself in this format. My ability to talk to people and communicate. I just wasn't somebody, when I talked to people, they understood me. And so if you go back to some of the earlier videos and things, and I've gotten better over the years, or certainly when you do something, but it was my ability to listen to my, listen to my videos, and as like somebody who never heard me or met me, and how would they, receive it? And I was like, oh, there's no way they'll understand what I'm saying. So I have to change the way I talk. I have to get better at, expressing and communicating. And so that all happened right after Chargy died. And so, there was a whole thing there. And so, I have something like I got from him. And I came back to the ashram right after he died, because we went to Hyderabad. And there was a few after the funeral, and I came back. And of course, Kamlesh had inherited, whatever Chargy had left for him to be the master of the system. But I saw Chargy's son, and the first time I saw him, I could see that he had just gotten whatever when Babaji died, my preceptor Fred said he went to India and there was like transmission coming out of every stone, like the whole country was just lit up. Babaji said that he would give everything to Charji that Charji could receive, and then everything else he had, he would just transmit out to it was just going to be available to everybody. All that he had accomplished spiritually, all that was in him, all his, powers and all of his, spiritual accomplishments and things. It was just released from his body after he died and was just saturating the planet and, particularly India. And there's a few people, there's a guy who was around Charji, I forget the guy's name. He was around him quite a bit. Charji had sent him out to make sure there's a smooth transition for Kamlesh. And there shouldn't be, people leaving the mission or, having any infighting. And this guy went around, for a couple of weeks before Charji died, all around India to these ashrams and talked to everybody saying, there needs to be, Charji wants this. And, turned out shitty anyway, because Kamlesh sucked, but, that's what's happened. But there's these 3 people I saw that had received from Charji. Like, maybe there's others I didn't see, but there were people that I was like, oh, wow, there's Charji had, given them all that he could, right? They'd received some sort of gifts from him. His son, this one guy in Kamlesh. And there might have been other people, that I didn't see everybody. But those people stood out to me. And so, as the channel started to develop, I realized that I had received something as well. And, I had a pain in my throat area for like 2 years after I meditated a lot. Like this, various pains. There's just energy, something was going on there. Almost felt like it's something physical, but it was, always brought on by meditation and my spiritual practice. So like something was being done to my, to my voice and my, area of expression. And so, I feel like this talk is, the talk that you're going to hear is sort of one of the more obvious reflections of that. The other thing is, let me switch over to the Dodgy Truther sent me this. Now, I am so far from being connected to Heartfulness, so I didn't see Heartfulness for like whatever it was. Like something I showed people, like the Dodgy Truther sends me stuff, and that's about it. It's my only connection to it, unless a viewer sends me something. One of my viewers sent me stuff, like one of the emails, and I don't open that browser so much that I use for the the whole thing. That has all my, it's the one, there's a talk there. All these, I'm looking at it right now, but these Sahaj Marg, emails. So occasionally I open that browser and maybe I open the emails. Like I don't feel like doing it right now, but they're building up, but I don't get so many emails there anymore. So anyways, I haven't seen the Heartfulness YouTube channel, haven't seen Dodgy, haven't seen any of these things. But the Dodgy Truther sent me this thing here, and it's so, I guess the gay would be like the way it used to be used when I was a kid. Heartfulness, yoga, wellness, join the Bandara as we embark on a transformative yoga journey, aligning mind, body, and spirit. And it's just like, this is the ashram there, the meditation hall. But, it's the way that they're celebrating, right? And this is yoga and wellness. So this is their yoga and wellness, physical stuff. Where at gatherings, most of us got sick or felt under the weather. It wasn't like physical health was associated with Bandaras. Bandara was these 4 masters' birthdays. Bandaras were special because they were the birthdays of the masters, which were supposed to be acknowledged and, I want to say, celebrated. Like it wasn't a holiday. It was a spiritual opportunity. The transmission would flow better. And, all of it. Like, I've talked about it so much. And so, this poster is just the opposite of that. Just fucking, just Totally not that. It's just not a good. I mean, just makes everything so stupid. Like it's just weak and stupid and just wrong and incompetent. I mean, they're just everything about what they're doing is the opposite of what Sahaj Marg was supposed to be about. I mean, they've taken the opposite path. Sahaj Marg is a deep, profound, and I mean, it's not for dum dums. It's not for superficial people. It's not for pop culture. It's like ancient and I mean, there's a sort of reverence and things to it. And Dodgy used to be like used to talk about elders. He used to say respected elders and traditional Indian things and all this stuff. But like he's just gone. I don't know how much he's even in charge of. Like he's probably delegated all these things to these dopes that he surrounded himself with, the worst people. Mr. S and these other people who are clueless. Like Mr. S had the worst videos. He put up personal videos up on YouTube and Facebook, and they were just, my wife and I used to watch and laugh at them. Like they were, I mean, I wanted to show these things on my channel. They were so bad. Like it's the stuff that they're like just, mockable and so, just also politically incorrect and clueless. There's a cluelessness to the heartfulness, that's just there. And I'm just, I'm thankful I don't think about it at all. Like I just don't look at things and, I'm just not attending to it because it's, not a part of my life. It's disappeared. Dodgy's birthday's coming up. I don't know if I'll even look at that. There's no real reason for me to do that. I've covered the Chargy gatherings because of him saying, he was going to cancel them, but that just hasn't happened. And, of course it's, whatever. But like I don't need to know anymore. And the people who are doing the system, they should know already. Like I've done my part. Like but they don't need me to know that Dodgy sucks, that Dodgy isn't falling through. I mean, if they've read any of the books, or they just listen. I mean, the Brighter Mind scam, and they see through that. Like I'm sure most of them have their doubts about a bunch of shit that he's doing, and they see that he's thrown Chargy under the bus. That he's discharged, he disrespected him in a way that's, So, anyways, just thought I'd throw these things out here before I get to these two audios, and here they are. So here's a list of empires, and then followed by a list of kingdoms. And I don't know what other words I could use. And these are just a fraction of what people know. This is only 5,000 years of history, and really less than that. And these are the various empires and kingdoms around the world that no longer exist or have collapsed. Everything collapses. And so knowing that there'll be a time when this empire, the English Empire or the European Empire, this modern day empire that has become the American Empire, will collapse. And what does that mean? Like what'll be life after the collapse of the empire? And not just for America, but a global situation. Do we retain our technology? Do we retain moving vehicles? The cars still exist. Do we have, running water? What's the hit on people's lifestyle, right? Certainly America's going to be reduced to some capacity. And that's something that happens and will happen and will continue to happen because everything dies, right? We'll come back to that. I want to talk more about death, which I've, talked about in a recent video. But if, you're a truther, if you're a real truther, like somebody seeking the truth, like, this is sort of a smell test, right, for truthers. If you're a truther, you understand that there is a shadow government. And I want to make a video called The Shadow Government. This is kind of a profound stuff. Some of it I think I've talked about, but some of it is new. It just came to me last night in a meditation. So if there's a shadow government, people who have power in the shadows that don't want to be known, right? Like there's people who so, don't value the humanity in other people. They don't want to be famous. They don't want to be famous. Like, do you want to be famous to a bunch of ants? Like if you looked at people like they were ants or like, cows, like livestock or something. Would you want to be famous to those people, right? Would you want their adoration and attention and fame, or would you just want to use them as a resource, like a livestock, right? So the people who run the planet, they don't want to be presidents and CEOs and people that you see. And if they are those people, they still want to minimize their fame, right? Like Trump, if he was so rich and all these things, he was on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and he was on The Apprentice, and he was on multiple talk shows. He was on all these various, the things that he put himself out there. He's in, he wanted to be a part of the Home Alone movie in New York, the second Home Alone movie. Like, he lobbied to be in that movie. He pushed for fame, and everyone, look at me, I'm really rich, right? The really, really rich people, they don't want any of that shit. Like, they don't value the opinion of the what do they call them? The muggles, right? The Harry Potter thing. They live a completely separate life where, even in terms of the royal families and things like this. The royal family in England, sure, but all the other, these other, institutions and families, the Rothschilds and the banks and all these things. The royal family is a front for a multi-billion dollar empire and business that's run by a bunch of people, what they call the firm, all of these things, like the people in the shadows. So if you're a truther, you believe in a shadow government. People who don't want to be known, that won't want the masses to know about them, but they're pulling the strings from the shadows, right? And so, the idea of a deep state, all these things, it's primitive idea of a shadow government. And really, we don't know who these people are. People throw out names like Rockefeller and Rothschilds and these things, but we don't even know who these people are. Like, they're so secretive, and we don't know what kind of, cabal or what kind of, institutions they have, and get-togethers and gatherings. There's Bilderberg, and there's these things that we know about, right? But we don't even know, like, the true nature of their interactions and how they manage things, because it's not just one group of people, one family. It's a whole bunch of, whatever, of these people that are part of a club, and they have to administer and run humanity in whatever direction they're doing for their personal benefit, right? And so, do you think these people would let Joe Biden wreck America? And what Trump is saying? Like, Trump says, that if Kamala Harris gets elected, she's going to run the country to the ground. Trump himself said, what kind of way is this to run the country, when he got ousted? Like, he thought he was going to win that election, clearly. He's bought into the illusion. This is when they put people undercover. You see this with movies about this, but it happens in real life, where they put people in undercover, and people will, engage in. There was a guy who was like an FBI agent, and he tried to, infiltrate some sort of, like militia type people, whatever it is, and he married a woman and had like kids, and he was undercover. He's marrying, one of the women who were in the gang or whatever he was doing, the criminal element. Like, they just lose it. They start living those lives, right? It only takes about a week, the Stockholm Syndrome. And so you start buying into your role. You forget you're acting. You forget you're living a double life, right? And so, Trump clearly believes in all of it. Like, he's bought into this role. And I don't even know how much they're telling him, because he's such a dope. He's just such a clown. So, but if you believe that there are people pulling the strings, that's what real truthers believe, that there's a shadow government. That's, Truther 101. Even Alex Jones and those people, shadow government, right? And so if there are people pulling the strings from the shadows, then if they don't want America to collapse, they wouldn't want America to collapse. They would, they wouldn't let it collapse, right? But if things are being done to collapse America, it's because they're making it happen. And if they're making it happen, there's no stopping them, because you don't have any real power. Some, dopes at Walmart are going to vote for Trump and stop this from happening. No, it's not. Like, the commercials and the way, the idiocracy that's set in, and the dumbing down of all of this stuff. My wife sent me a close-up video of Gwen Walsh, and I talked about her crazy eyes, and you can really see it in the close-up video, and I'll cover that in my next video. she's just batshit crazy. Like they all are, and they're all, they're not functional people, and they're pandering to the stupidest people. They're not going after smart people votes, right? Smart people might feel like, they're obliged to vote, and so they'll pick one or the other, but they're pandering to the dumbest level of people. And then, does that even matter? Like, does that, they got those machines that can be hacked and all the rest of it. So is it, the elections are not really even legitimate. And even if they are, there's people who run the government because there's a shadow fucking government. And so if the collapse of our system is being talked about, and we now see that it's, potentially going to happen, then they must be making that happen, right? They must know that this has to happen. They've accepted this has to happen. They don't have any allegiance to America. They use people and they use countries for whatever, to keep the system and going, to keep their power, their reign of terror going, right? Like their empire going. And so it's going to collapse inevitably. I mean, it's built to collapse. It's a debt-based economic system. And they use the American people are not, even with bringing in immigrants, we're so entitled, and we're so, we're just not good workers anymore. We're not good subjects to these shadow kings, right? And so they'll just go with somebody else. They'll go with people who are hungrier, who are more desperate, right? Who are willing to do work, or robots. Like I said this before, like when robots can, most of the population could be reduced, and they could just have robots do all the, they can have millions of people, not even billions, less than, 500 million people, whatever it is, right? And the Georgia Guidestones or whatever that is, I don't know how legitimate that is either, but, they can reduce the population by billions of people and just have robots do all the things they need to be done. And, there'll be minimal use and need for other people, right? And the planet will, won't suffer as much pollution, and they won't need as much energy. They won't have to gather as much food, and they still have a slave population that is, doesn't question their, whatever, right? So robots, the existence of robots will bring down humanity, because robots are already replacing humanity, just like AI is replacing humanity. Think about if there was just exclusive areas, coastal areas, and places where rich people want to live, like the best places by the ocean, these coastal areas. And the rest was just nature. The planet, is taking care of itself. Just vast amount of natural areas, undeveloped areas where trees and forests could regrow, and, less use of oil, less use of natural gas, and all the things that are harming the planet. And they could just, reduce the population to the people that they thought were worth, keeping, and then get rid of everybody else and have robots. And you would have the planet could heal itself, and all these issues. The overpopulation is a real thing, and they know about it. And so, at some point, they're going to make a plan, or they're going to execute a plan that's been in the making for years to get rid of vast amount of population. So you just got to have to look at that as a realistic possibility. You think that's happening already because you thought they were trying to, do that with the vax and these other things, right? Population reduction. And so you already kind of believe that, yet you're doing nothing to prepare for that inevitability of a collapse of system, right? And I'm not trying to sell this to you. I just can't believe that you're not even thinking about it, which most people are so overwhelmed and asked out that they can't. They're bankrupt. They don't have enough, they just have enough energy to get through the day because of their shitty lives and their drained relationships. They don't have any extra love or prana in their heart or energy and resources to do anything else. That's the sad part. That's most truthers. They could watch videos and lament and, think about what's going on and suffer what's, in a more awakened state than the average sheeple. But they can do nothing to stop it other than, well, I'll vote for Trump, and just doing random shit because they have no other recourse but to do that, right? But the other piece to this is, if you're like, the first thing is if you're a truther. And the second thing is if you're a person who believes in God, right? you believe there's a divine system, then you have to look at what's going on here and saying, this thing that we have now goes against God. It's not, divinely inspired. And I'm not talking just about abortion or any of these symptoms. The whole system. That we are getting farther and farther away from God. We're getting farther and farther away from what it's like to be natural human beings. And each generation gets more and more inhuman, like more and more like the best part of being a human, disconnected from their souls and everything else, right? You don't think people are getting better, right? You think they're getting and more divine and getting, religion is dying, and the religion sucks, and I've gone through that, right? How the religion is is disconnecting people from God. But people don't even have that. Kids are growing up without any of those good things of religion. I mean, at least better than being indoctrinated. It'd be better to be indoctrinated by religion and have some fear of God, even though fear of God is a horrible thing to have, than have, being raised by the internet and these demonic people that, they're the worst people. You see the difference now in ways that it affects the family, the way it affects morality. People getting farther and farther away from those things. And, as bad as religion is, at least people have an idea that there's God, even if it's not, helpful. And so you got to see that things are going in a direction that's demonic, right? And so if you believe in God and you see that we're going in the opposite direction, don't you think God has a plan to stop that? To minimize the damage, right? Or that there be consequences when you go away from God, right? Wouldn't that be the case? So if the controllers are pushing for depopulation and a collapse of the system, and, particularly America right now, for all Americans, and both people are saying it, both parties are saying it, that collapse of America is on the table, and the controllers that are, the puppet masters of these people aren't preventing that and are allowing that message to get out there. And not only just that, but movies and, people just have this sense of an apocalypse, a pending doom. I mean, even that, people are like, believing that this is totally possible, that the collapse of the empire is imminent, right? And God would be pushing for it. The divine forces, there must be divine beings that, work for God and are overseeing the planet. I mean, that's a, wonderful way to look at it. There's, that they just don't leave this thing to chance, that all the saints and the people that are here, spiritual people, are looking at this system saying, oh man, we're fucked, and are coming up with a plan to destroy it because it can't be, fixed. It's going in the wrong direction. And so both of those, if you have the people that are the shadow government people and also the divine forces, are both pushing for the collapse of this system. It's a necessity. There's no other option, right? And we should be able to see that that's the, the only good thing, the only possible way to, I mean, it's like Trump going bankrupt again, right? Like there's no, becomes something where that becomes the best option for him, but not for the rest of the world. But anyways, what we're talking about here is a systemic collapse. And so that has to happen. It's inevitable, and it's a good thing when it does. And so, putting some effort into, and this is what Pockets of the Future stands for. And I've been making videos and, hundreds of millions of views, and, people have heard the message about divinity being within them, my primary messages, and, building a future, like a better version, a better system, and starting now on a local basis where there's these little pockets of the future starting to live now the way everyone's going to have to live in the future, because there's going to be a transition. If any part of humanity survives the collapse of the empire, which has happened before, right? The good thing about this is that these collapsing empires and kingdoms and all these things, and again, there's many more. I'm going to show these lists, but these lists that I've shown earlier in this video, there are many more than that, right? Like there's just the ones we know about. And there's been so many of these empires. Everything dies. It's a system, right? And so, people don't have a belief that they're going to die. And that's, the big issue here. And with that, like America's too big to fail, right? The banks are too big to fail, the economy, these things. And that somehow you can say the system and the people are going to live forever. almost nobody prepares for their death, and they've really heightened the fear of death. So it's the one inevitability. We're all going to die. It's the one guarantee. It's just a matter of when. It's not an if thing, right? I mean, are you going to get married? Well, that's an if. Are you going to have kids? Well, that's an if. Are you going to be homeless? Well, that's an if, right? Are you going to have cancer? Well, that's an if, right? Are you going to be healthy? Well, for some period of time, that's an if, right? I mean, anything that you think about that people have, are you going to eat tomorrow? Well, that's an if. You know, there's so many ifs out there. But the one thing that isn't an if is death. Like, that's a when. That's not an if. There's no if about it. There's no living forever. You know, you can live for 200,000 years, 1,000,000 years, but it's still a when. You know, the when is, you know, usually, I mean, lately, in the past whatever amount of years, the when is, you know, 120 years. Somewhere between the day you're born and 120 years from now. And mostly 80 or 90, you know, or 70 is the average, 79, almost 80. In America, but globally, I don't know what it is, right? It's probably your 70s, 80s. And so, you know, it's between that, you know, that day you're born and that, you know, time period and the maximum amount of, you know, days that you could live, right? You know, my wife and I were talking about this because my dad had irritable bowel syndrome for the last 20 years of his life. And he was always had this big pot belly. So my dad was like a couple inches shorter than me. And, you know, not I'm a better version. Let's put physically, I'm a better version. Better athlete, right? You know, better looking. But, you know, I have some of my dad in me and my family. You know, like in terms of my family, I'm, you know, the tallest. Like that's, you know, taller than anybody, my siblings and my grandparents and any of these people. So I'm taller than them. And, you know, I'd like to think smarter and certainly more spiritual because none of them embarked on a spiritual journey like I did, right? So I'm a better version, but I still have all these same, you know, genetic tendencies or whatever it is. But my dad was like scared shitless of death. Like he was just petrified of death. And my family and I, my kids and I, drove down to Florida to see my parents. I'm not sure why now. Like you know, don't know why. It was a time my ex, she was, you know, by herself, and she invested and started watching Alex Jones. Like Alex Jones, I had found, you know, I would become a truther, and I watched some of these videos about the big event in September, you know, 2001, and you know, I didn't really know much about Alex Jones, but she found Alex Jones. You know, now she's a liberal and a truther denier. But she did this on her own, and she really got into it. Like I had already had my awakening, and then right after that, I was going down to Florida with my kids. And, you know, with this big 16-passenger van. And there's an ashram. My brother was staying at the ashram, and, you know, my kids got sick on the way. Like we're going from Virginia to Molina, Georgia, then to Boca Raton, Florida. And it was a long, you know, drive. Florida's like forever. It's like, you know, it's longer than like 3 states. You know, it's just this long state, the peninsula is going out to the ocean. Florida's just like this giant sandbar, right? Where the Gulf of Mexico, the water gets heated and, you know, the water goes up the Gulf Stream and heats Europe. And if Florida didn't exist, Europe would freeze, right? Like it's just that kind of a world. Like if Florida didn't have this area where this Gulf of, you know, the Gulf of Mexico was created, where the water just gets heated up there. You know, that's why there's a lot of hurricanes that come up through that area because hot water is, you know, feeds these hurricanes. But anyways, you know, there's, we drove down there. And I hadn't seen my parents maybe in 4 or 5 years. My dad, longer. Like my mom had come to visit maybe, I don't know, when my daughter was born. Like, so I don't even know how long it had been since I'd seen my dad. But we went down there, and my dad was a shell of himself. Like he could only barely see. He really couldn't see at all. He had cataracts. And he was like a living, walking skeleton. He had lost all this weight. You know, he loved to eat. So my dad had, you know, like I was saying to my wife, he loved to eat. He loved to watch TV. And that was about it. He had, you know, pornography. So I think he was, you know, a chronic, you know, masturbator, whatever it was, right? But like, I don't know when these things fell off, but he had these three things, right? Like that's all he did. Like he did a little writing and did whatever, but in reality, he liked to eat. He was a big Italian eater, and he liked to watch TV, and that's about it. Like I don't think he liked anything else. And he didn't really have any friends, and nobody really liked the kids. None of us liked him or would go to him for advice because he was a loser, and he was petrified of death, and I could see it. And they had this woman come in and bathe him, like some nurse, and they were in Boca Raton, Florida, and it was 80 degrees out, and they turned the heat up in the house so it was 90 degrees, and they did it all night. The heat was set on 90 in the night, right? When they had 2 bedrooms, and my dad was in one, my mom was in the other. My dad could no longer bathe himself; he could barely eat, and I'm like, how the fuck is he alive? Like, just die already, right? Why are you doing this? Because he was petrified of dying. I'm like, how is this living? You have nothing to live for. You have nothing to offer humanity, and you're just hanging on, and the medical community was just keeping him alive. And he was walking around. When I saw him, I was like freaked out. I was like, he was a skeleton. Like he was so, there was no, he had lost any weight that he had. He was just like his skin was on his bones. He couldn't process his food and nutrients because his digestive system was fucked. And he was just clinging on to life, petrified of death. And he hung on for another year. And my mom, who, they were separated for a little while, like maybe 10 years before that. And they were both living in separate houses. And my dad was desperate to get back together with my mom because she was taking care of him. And I thought she would be liberated of him, and she'd have a life without him. And she died like a year and a half later. And she was in much better shape when we saw them both. But she had nobody to take care of anymore, and she had no real purpose. And so she died, right? But neither one of them died well. I'm sure my mom died better because she had a relationship with God. She felt the energy when she did the Sahaj Marg meditation. And even, despite that, she prayed a lot, and she had, a spiritual life as a Christian, as a Catholic. And so either way, she had a much better death. But I saw my dad being just petrified, right? Like he did the meditation, and he saw light, the meditation I do. And he got scared and never did it again. And I'm like, you're supposed to meditate on divine light. Like I never saw light. And when you saw it and you didn't, walk into the light, Ralph, walk into the light, or Ralph, I was talking about Ralph in the beginning, but, he died petrified of death. And, my wife has a situation now, a relative who has terminal cancer. We're talking about that. Similar, someone who's just petrified of death and, all of these things. Now, I'm not advocating being a daredevil and doing bungee jumping and hang gliding and, parachuting and being one of these risk people, right? And those people are almost more scared of death, right? These thrill seekers, but they're looking for a thrill. I'm not talking about that. And I'm not talking about suicide or just giving up, but embracing the idea that you're going to die. Our culture has made us petrified of death, and you just don't think about it. There's this happily ever after thing that happens, but, it also makes us petrified of the problems and the difficulties that we go through in our life, right? So these are the things that we've been, taught, and the things that we, believe are, avoidable, right? And this being petrified of death, or, not even thinking about it as being inevitable. Most people think they're going to live forever, and then they get old and they're like, what the fuck, right? And it just, creeps up on you really quickly. The older you get, the faster time flies by you. It just does. It's amazing how fast time flies for me now. It's a weird phenomenon because I think about something that happened a year ago, and I'm like, wow, that seems like 10 years ago. But moving forward from that year, the days just fly by. And so, it seems like time was so slow when I was a kid. It just moves faster, right? And so if you look at your time as a currency, your time is what really is valuable. It's not, it's the real currency, right? It's the amount of time that you have before you die in this life. And it's a currency that you throw away, when you're young. You just flitter it away, whatever bad choices you make, whatever crappy foods you eat, whatever lifestyle choices you make, whatever bad relationship choices you make. And the other currency is your life's energy, right? The energy you have in your life. And so these two things, go together, because your life's energy, your prana, when that's all used up, you're dead. This love energy that you have, right, on a soul level. And so when that's used up, and your time ends. And so these two currencies, the energy that you have, because you could have time left, but your life energy is just gone. You see people all the time, and they're just bankrupt and they're incapable. They've just, they're like, wet noodles. They don't have anything. They don't have a will force. They don't have a life force. They're barely functioning. Go look at people in an insane asylum or homeless people, right? They've just given up. They have nothing. So they have time left, but no life force, right? So these are your currencies. And people think of all these other things as their currencies, and those are your currencies of your life. What you have of value, what you have to spend on things, right? It's like, in a video game, like you spend your life force on certain things, right? You buy certain things, wherever how the video game is structured. But you have these lives, right? You have so many lives that you're given, and you have this life force. And, somebody shoots you or something like that, takes a hit of your life force, right? Whatever, way that your life force is, especially these video games where your life force, it's not like you just die every time. Like you have, your life is at 80%. Your life is at your energy, whatever. And so, this understanding of your life being reduced by bad choices, and then also your time being minimized with those bad choices, right? Where, okay, you were going to live to 80, but now you're going to live to 70 because you were a coke addict, or you're a meth head, or all these things. That now your time has been reduced, right? So there's two ways of looking at your time. There's the maximum amount of time that you're going to have on this planet, right? And then there's the time reduction aspect by bad choices, where that maximum amount of time gets taken away. And then also the time that you have on a daily basis. Like you have you have today. You have this moment. What are you going to do in this moment? Like of a value to you. Like if you're not figuring out what your soul wants you to do, you're not getting to your true purpose here, then you're just going to make bad choices. If you don't even know you have a soul, or think about you having a soul, and you don't think about your soul's path, and you're not embracing the divinity within you to guide you on on the appropriate path, the right path, then you're just going to make wrong choices, right? You're going to waste spend your currency of your time to go backwards, and just embrace the the negativity of this illusionary demonic system that dominates your physical existence. And so people don't think this way because they don't understand that death is inevitable. They don't understand they have a limited amount of time, and the clock is ticking, right? And that all the things that were important to do that you've put off, the things that are essential, like finding a purpose and doing something. You're just flittering your time away doing some slave job, and wasting your time going to family gatherings or things like this, and just out of obligation, and just, oh, these are the things I'm supposed to do, and just ticking the box and checking the boxes, and just mindlessly going through life unaware of your true purpose or any real thing. Like it's just not being a real person, right? It's not being alive. It's not living a life, right? And so this is all part of the voting for Trump or Kamala. Like it's all just a waste of time. Like, can't you see this is a waste of time? I have to watch this stuff because I mock it, and I have a higher purpose in terms of saying there's something else. Like that's my job here, saying there's something else other than what you're seeing. There's something else other than the news and Hollywood and the politics and material life and capitalism and all these things that you are focused on. You've been told this is your life, and you're like, well, isn't there something more? And I provides the something more here. The Sahaj Marg meditation, an internal life, and soul-driven existence, right? Like not that that's my thing, but I'm saying that there's this other thing, and people who connect with this other thing, and then you have this sense of, okay, I'm accepting that death is inevitable, and death isn't a bad thing. That's the other thing. we've been told over and over again, and it's really in our TV and movies more than anything else, that death is a bad thing, right? I mean, it's inevitable, and yet it's bad. And it's the one guarantee, and yet it's bad, right? It's the one thing that we all share, and yet it's bad. And so why is it bad? And so, is there something better? Like, then the question is there something better than life, right? If death isn't bad, well, then, is there something better than being a human being? Is this not as good as something else that's waiting for us, potentially, if we live our lives in a correct manner? Like, can we graduate out of this experience on planet Earth and then, be elevated to something else, right? The promise of an afterlife that exists in religions, but it's just bullshit stuff, because the promise, like in Christianity, that if you accept Jesus and, you accept the religion, that somehow you're going to be in this heavenly, or, these people, these jihadists that believe that they're going to get 70 virgins and a mule if they, do these things. I mean, it's just bullshit stuff, right? Like, really connecting now to the divinity within you. And then you're connecting to, I've told that story that Master Chargy, the third master of the system, used to tell the story about there is this kingdom. And you could be king for a year, because they had all these kings that would wreck the country. And so they would have someone be king for a year. And that king would just indulge. And then after the year was up, they would be taken and banished from the kingdom. And so one person was, like a smart guy, was made king, and he didn't indulge at all. He spent all his time building a kingdom on the other side. They would take the king to a river and sail him across the river, put him across the river in a boat and let him go and say, you can't come back to the kingdom. But he spent all his time, a year, building another kingdom on the other side of the river. And then he went to they put him in a boat and put him across the river. And he went in and said, I'm the king of this new kingdom, right? It's a metaphor for death, right? It's, spending your time partying, spending your time indulging in your material, pleasures and sensory stimulation, as opposed to building this other kingdom on a spiritual level, so that when you die, you go across to that, right? And so this is using your time correctly. But if if you're a kind of person who thought about death, regularly, in not a bad way or good way, a neutral way, you're not looking forward to it, you're not embracing it, you're not saying, oh, I can't wait for I can't wait, because people get to that state where they can't wait to die, right? They've been so crushed by their life that they can't wait to die. And they're longing for death. Not because something better is waiting for them on the other side, just that their life has sucked so bad, right? And then there's, people who are just petrified and never think about it. But just have a healthy, realistic perspective about dying, and that you're aware of it. You're aware that you have a limited time here, and let's make the most of it in some positive way. And what does that mean? Well, maybe being more connected to people, whatever you think it is, or maybe it's about spirituality or whatever. That's the best thing. I mean, there has to be after death. Like, you have to think about what's going to happen after death, and not some bullshit promise you've been given by your religion that, they can't deliver on because they've made a false promise to you. Like, anything that's promised you by an organization is not, valid, right? It's got to be something that you can experience, the kingdom of heaven within, as Jesus said, that you can go inside and experience your etheric side, your soul. You can experience the part of you that, and where you are right now as a soul. Like, your soul exists somewhere in the etheric world, in the energetic world, right? And so when you die, that's where you're going. Like, wherever your soul is right now, your soul exists in your body and in that place right now. Like, it's both things. Like, just like you're an avatar in a video game, and the person's outside, in the computer watching it on the screen. Like, your soul is, exists in a different realm, a different, outside the third dimensional planet Earth, right? But it's also in your body, because it's not it's no physical distance, because it's the third dimensional realm of planet Earth. It's physical distance. You have to walk from one place to another. But etheric being can travel just by thought to anywhere in the physical universe or anywhere in the etheric universe that they're allowed to go, right? They have access to, right? And so if you think about that you can connect right now to where you'll be after you die, to the etheric world, well, that makes the journey a lot easier because you're consciously aware of it. You're consciously aware of your transition from, I mean, when you go to sleep, that's the case. I talked about sleep in this video, a voiceover that I never turned into a video, and I think I have it still somewhere. But like sleep is a part of that, right? Because you're dying. Like, where do you go when you're sleeping? You're not in your physical body. Like, you have to be pulled in, you get woken up by your alarm clock or somebody wakes you up or whatever. And your consciousness has to be pulled back into your soul, has to be like pulled back into your body, and you have to open your eyes. And, and during that period of time, you don't know what the fuck just happened, right? Like, you can wake up and someone's painted a mustache on your face, right? You don't know, like, you're dead to the world. That's what the people say. Things are going on in the world. You wake up and there's events, and you went to bed, it was dark, and you wake up, it's the sun's come up, and you're completely unaware of what's happened. And so, like, that's a taste of death, right? It's a taste of your body no longer being occupied by you, and you being unconscious of the material world. And so if you had this kind of perspective, then your life would be greatly changed, because you would live your life in a different way. And they've prevented you, the people powers that be, through this materialistic system, from thinking about life and death and things and real things, and just get you focused on the, immediate desire or immediate problem and immediate thing to solve, and, whatever. Petty little things and things like elections. I mean, it's all just one big distraction, right? And you can clearly see that this system that you're 100% dependent on is coming to an end. That you might last to whatever extent, depending on how old you are, some portion of it. But in 100 years, the Earth is going to be completely different. There's going to be systemic collapse, and there's going to be drastic changes. And 200 years, 300 years, whatever. There's going to be like things that we thought were, there's going to be no America. Like, there's going to be no whatever. There'll be no, the structure of the world will be changed, and the physical structure and the social systems of the governments, they're all going to disappear. And people living in 200-300 years are going to have completely different lifestyles. And just right now, you're watching an abomination. You're watching something that shouldn't be. It's an abomination of what, like, goes against the divine will and, God's plans and things like this. Or at least, it's wrong choices. It's a plethora of wrong choices, of collective wrong choices of humanity, going against their, soul's path and doing, things that are taking them in the wrong direction. And when it goes, it goes. And right now, you're watching it die. You're watching something that, in a way, should have never been, die a miserable death. And, we're connected to it, dependent on it. And so it's something that everyone should be aware of. And, the idea then becomes, well, what happens next? And you can think about that in terms of what happens after you die and what happens after the system dies. What do I do then? What's going to become of me, a person dependent on the system and distracted by the system, when the system goes, or when I die? Like, what's going to happen then? And these are like real questions people should be asking, because, time is running out. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely pointing for the Apocalaughs. And the Ascension, everyone have a blessed day, and be grateful. Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. This audio is probably going to go in my journey series as well, and maybe in a video with my other thing about time and space. So a few interesting things happened after I talked about time being the only real currency. Somebody posted a meme on Facebook that said something like, time is the only currency that you can't make any more of, or something like that. And then there was this guy, Adrian Wojnarowski, who works for ESPN as a basketball insider. And he retired from ESPN, and they read his tweet, and he said this: time isn't endless supply, and I want to spend mine in ways that are more personally meaningful. And so there were two things that were said within a day or two of me talking about time as currency, right? Like, there was I hadn't heard that. The idea came to me, but apparently other people had thought similar things, right? I mean, people think about time, and from time to time, people think about something like that, right? Their time, especially as you get older and you realize, death is coming, right? As you pass a certain age, you have events in your life where you realize that death is a possibility. Either somebody close to you dies, or you have a near-death experience, or you have, some sort of a medical issue, and all of a sudden you think, oh wow, yeah, I'm going to die, or death is part of life, and you think about that time is finite here, and it's just something that people go through. And so with that, my wife and I are watching this show called Capture on Peacock, and I want to talk about the show more in a future video. We're not quite through with it, and it's about they have this video. They video everything in Correction. I believe it's called Correction. The show. No, it's actually called Capture. I just wanted to look it up and make sure. And they have 2 seasons about this, the spying, the overwhelming the video surveillance system in England. It's got an interesting name too, and I can't remember it right now. It's not important. But part of it is there is these people had invented an algorithm to really successfully be able to figure out what people are going to do. Like with all the data that's out there and the sophistication of AI and algorithms, they have a pretty good idea what people are going to do. Like they just know, and it's getting better and better. They know personally and collectively what people are going to choose to do, right? And I was thinking about this already. So, this part of the show came up, and, I was thinking about this already, that this idea of a multiverse, right? People talk about the multiverse. It's a thing in the Marvel universe where, there is multiple versions of you or in some sort of alternative reality based in choice points. Like every time you come to a choice point, you make multiple choices. And when you make these different choices, you go in different directions, right? Like there's timelines now. There's new timelines created. And you have a different version of yourself going through these different timelines. The timelines have been created by having, made choices, making more than one choice, which is not possible, right? Because when you make a choice, you make a choice. That's why you have choice points. There are choices you make, and you don't make more than one. You make one choice. You can go back and think, oh, what if I made that choice? What would my life be like? But that's just imagination. It's not real. You have these situations where you are choosing, one thing or another, or multiple choices. You have oftentimes, like I said, there's one right choice. The life that you get right is the one where you make the choice that God wants you to make, right? Your soul wants you to make. Sometimes there's small choices, like you're at a buffet and you're gonna see food, and you're making choices of the food you're gonna eat, and maybe you don't make the best choice there because you don't take it all that seriously. You're just picking one thing over another. You're choosing what you're going to eat at a restaurant or whatever. You're choosing, what you're going to wear for the day, like just all these things, when you're going to do this or if you're going to do this, and, what you eat for breakfast, all the things that you do, right? There's choices like that, like choices of small choices. And then there's the big choices that really affect your life. Not that the small choices don't as well, because the small choices mount up, right? Do I floss my teeth today? Something like that, right? That leads to, maybe some kind of dental issue that leads to maybe some sort of medical issue, down the road, especially when there's, the choices mount up. But there's the small choices you make, and then there's big choices you make, right? And the big choices have more of an effect on your, the choices that you make, that, who you're going to marry, what you're going to do for a career, these things, that lifestyle, where you're going to live, do I live in a city or do I live in a country, and these things. And, these choices have an overall effect on everything, right? These big choices affect everything in a, much more profound way. And in the Sahaj Marg system, the teachings that are there is that these choices are really kind of not choices. Like this is now backed up by the fact that they can predict what you're going to do. They could feed all of your data, all of your, choices you make on the internet, everything that they know about you. They collect all your data, all the spying stuff they do. They could collect all the, recorded conversations they record, because they're obviously doing that. Many of us have experienced this, where you're talking about something, like my wife and I go for a walk, and the only thing that we have is my phone. My phone is on me, and I come in, and something we talked about is recommended on Facebook. Like, how is that possible? Within minutes, right? Of us talking about it. And so many people said, yeah, they've had the exact same experiences. So you think about all the data they collect, and they run it through these, very developed, sophisticated algorithms and, AI bots, and they know what you're going to do. And if they know what you're going to do, then there is no real choice, right? Like, your choices are predictable. They're systematic. They're preordained, right? There's something where you are, you're just going to do this thing. Your tendencies are there. And, somebody living a spiritual life has to break those patterns, has to, have significant changes in those ways that people just make these. You become almost an automaton, and you're just going through, not really making choices. It's just everything's predictable, to where you start making choices that are, connected to your soul and God, where you now bring in, a higher authority to guide you through that process. And, I was able to do this in the Sahaj Marg system. And, using your heart as an instrument, as as where you can, hear God's voice or your soul's voice, right? They're both basically the same thing in this scenario. The divinity within you is your soul, and your soul always wants to do what God wants to do, right? Your soul always will do what God wants to do. So if you give your soul a voice, or you find a way to connect to your soul, then you will make a decision that, God wants, doing this YouTube channel the way I did it, there's a point where I was really not wanting to do celebrity videos. And, I didn't want to, I knew I had to do the YouTube channel. I knew this was something I was supposed to do, so I had to deal with that, right? The things that, oftentimes that are not very palatable, and you're like, I don't want to do that. But there was, obviously benefit for me doing that, right? Something that, I now have accepted it. It wasn't so bad. Like, it sucked in the beginning, doing the amount of stuff, because I don't care about that stuff, right? But, I had to connect with people. I had to do those things. And so when you, have these choices, oftentimes the thing that you don't want to do, or are scared to do, or whatever it is. And, not like, something like in a daredevil way of being scared, but something that's uncertain and foreign, and, puts you in a situation where you have to work harder, and, it's not the easy way. It's not the easy choice. God's choice is often not the easy choice, right? It's the choice that you don't want to make, right? The idea that you're giving something up, or you're committing to doing something that you don't, if you really want to commit to doing that, right? A lot of the choices with God are about commitment to something where you have to give of yourself more. You're in a situation where you have to, be responsible, or be more giving, or be more loving, or, these things, right? Those are the choices that your soul wants you to make, right? And so to tie this back to the time and space audio that I did, this stuff I talked about with my brother and my ex, and, various other people who do the Sahaj Marg system, I don't feel like they ever surrendered their choice to the divinity within them. That's why these people are all failing to deal with the dodgy debacle. Because, when you don't think you ever make a mistake, right? Like, you don't think that you need to change, then you don't feel like you need help making choices. And this is, ties into Donald Trump too as well. Like Donald Trump is that guy, somebody who never thinks anything he does is wrong. And so there's no need to bring in the higher authority, people with that kind of narcissism, and people who are overly controlled and want to control things and don't want to face up to their mistakes, right? Don't want to admit to their mistakes internally. Doesn't matter what you do with other people. You can apologize, you can lie, you can deny. I mean, those are all choices in themselves, but as long as you know, like you have to know, like you screwed up or see your mistakes and see that you need to change things. And by changing the fundamental way that you perceive these choice points, by bringing in a higher authority and seeing them through the divinity within you, and then it becomes easy to make choices because God will help you make. If you ask, God will help you make the choices. But people who never ask because they don't think that they do anything wrong, they think that they're always right and always doing the right thing. I mean, you see people like that, and it sucks to be with them, right? Because they never change, and they just make the same mistakes over and over again, and everyone else suffers those mistakes, but they themselves never see it, and they just blame. They feel like victims. Like, why isn't the world cooperating? You see this with Trump is a great example. Why isn't the world cooperating? Doesn't the world know how great I am? They think everything's unfair because they think they don't look at the signs and the warnings and everything that's being told to them. Master Chargy, the third master of the Sahaj Marg system, said something kind of brilliant about rich people. He said, rich people don't pray. He said, because if they did, they would realize that they have the resources to give and fix things, right? Like, they don't, maybe they pray for more wealth or, they get cancer, they pray for God to, not real prayer. But if they prayed about, like, say, problems that happen in the world, they would realize that they could, give up some of the wealth that they're hoarding, really rich people, and change things for other people. Like, they have the ability to make the world a better place by giving of what they are hoarding, right? Like, anybody who doesn't want to give up what they have, it doesn't have to be, rich people. But if you start praying and you start opening up to God and you start feeling compassion and empathy for other people, you realize that you could do things differently, right? And so they don't want to open up to God because once they did, they realize they would have to change and give shit up, right? Because they know that, the stuff that they're doing isn't okay with their souls and God. Like these people who are, actively going against the will of God by doing bad shit in the world. And you know what I'm talking about. And once you open up to God, you have to face those things, right? And, I've experienced that through the meditation. When I do something wrong or make a mistake or, whatever it is, especially if I did something that would hurt somebody else's heart, I would feel it. I was always feeling it my whole life, but I didn't really, it was blocked to whatever extent. But when I started meditating, I became more sensitive to those things, right? And more aware of it. And I could see, how my behavior affected other people. And, it bothered me. And, it would linger. And, I'd do these nighttime cleaning and, do the meditation, and it would just come up. Because when you meditate and you sit there and you reflect, things that you did wrong just, appear before you. Like, you feel them. And, you have regret and you have, these feelings that go with it, right? And, I wish I didn't do that. And, maybe, you start thinking about changing and becoming a person that, doesn't do things like that, right? And so once you open up to God, that's what happens. Like you no longer can deny and, push away things that, that are mistakes and things that you need to change, right? And egos have developed these ways of pushing everything away and, creating blockage points to the feedback they're getting, right? The world is telling them, hey, you're doing this wrong, it's hurting us. If you go and, like, if somebody that Donald Trump hurt came up and said, this is what your words did to me, he would have a way of, denying that and not accepting it, right? If, like, he's, right now there's this thing with the Haitians, he's, making up this stuff about Haitian people. And let's say somebody did a hate crime against them because they were inspired by Trump's, rhetoric, right? I mean, you could say the same thing about the Democrats and their, their lies and their, whatever it is. And the person that got hurt came up and confronted them, right? Like when I worked as a counselor with teenage sex offenders, so they're part of the Pathways program was victim reunification. And if there was like a sibling and, somebody in the house that the person had victimized, they had to have these meetings and take full responsibility and, blame for whatever had happened. And they had to listen to the person, usually like a younger sibling or somebody, tell them how that it affected them, right? And, how their behavior affected them. And, if the person's open to it, they feel like shit, right? It's really hard for them to do that because they're sex offenders already feel a great deal of shame, like they're the lowest of the low, right? In prison, they're the worst, right? Amongst criminals, they're the worst, and they, feel like crap about what they've done. Plus, they've often been victims themselves as kids, so they're perpetrating, an abusive cycle and whatever. But they do this now with prisoners as well, that they have to meet the victims of the crime and hear what they did, how they affected them, right? And people who are incapable of receiving that and hearing that, right? There's people who just never will be able to feel anything and from other people, and they're just blocked off, and they've created all these walls and defense mechanisms and ways of not receiving the feedback that's being given to them by God, because you're constantly being warned about the error of your ways, like things are just being shown to you. As a collective people, we're being warned, and then as individuals, but people just keep on doing the same, bad shit. People running this system, and it's because they're oblivious to, the feedback they should be receiving, especially their hearts, which are cocooned in, like a hard spiritual substance that prevents them from feeling empathy or compassion or love and these things, right? People who are just, being hedonistic and, just narcissistic and selfish and, are sensory stimulation and, pleasure-based people. People are seeking power and just, all the things that like that, right? Seeking some sort of materialistic, gratification of, like without, any sense of self-improvement and having that acknowledging that there's a divine reason they're here and there's a soul's purpose and just, these sorts of things, which I talk about so much. But yeah, so that's why there's no multiverse, because we do make choices. We make choices all the time, but in some ways the choices are preordained. So it's the way that we go about making the choices is as important, right? The way that we go about our experiences. The experiences will all come in one form or another. We'll have these tests, we'll have these interactions, like there's just, another way to think about it is deja vu, or people who see, things happening in the future. If you have a vision of the future, like how would you have that if there's, any chance that wouldn't happen, right? Like a deja vu moment is something where, this moment was going to happen and you have an experience of that, like a premonition of a, like, oh yeah, I knew this was coming, right? And there's all these things like that are there because of the events are going to unfold. It's just how you go about them. Like it's, how you perceive them, how you, formulate your, your internal world in such a way that there's some, higher consciousness of doing what God wants you to do, like connecting to God. And that's the big thing. Like people don't want God as a part of their life because they don't want to make choices that God would want them to make, right? Your ego finds a way to exclude God from the choice process because your ego wants to make choices that God would never make. But anyways, let's move on here.